Do you believe Peter's apparent disapproval of cosmetics is rooted in Enochian material?
All right, well, I have to assume that the verse here is 1 Peter 3, verse 3. Let me just read that. Peter says, "Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and putting on of gold jewelry, or the clothing you wear." You know, the verse actually doesn't refer to or mention cosmetics. I know it often gets used this way, but it actually doesn't mention cosmetics. It's the braiding of the hair, certain items of jewelry, clothing. You know, think about what the verse actually says. I mean, let's just keep reading. I'll go back and read verse 3 again. "Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry, or the clothing you wear." So again, does it really demand that women stop braiding their hair? Is there a command in there to stop braiding your hair? Or to stop wearing clothing? Is Peter commanding women to stop wearing clothing or jewelry? No, it warns against those things superseding inner beauty. Okay, look at verse 4. "But let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious." Now, the point is that we shouldn't read verse 3 without reading verse 4. And the other issue, again, besides, or I should say, the real issue in these two verses, verses 3 and 4, other than, sort of just being a shallow person, shallow woman here, was the idea that, we need to cultivate what's inside versus cultivating what is outside, things that people see. You could say, well, Mike, people see cosmetics too. Well, that's true, they do. It's not in the verse. I don't write the New Testament. I just read it. It's not in the verse, and I don't see a command to stop braiding hair, stop wearing clothing, and stop wearing jewelry. What I do see is Peter's concern that these things should not be the basis of your identity and your just not only your identity, but of course, who you really are, which I guess is another way of saying your identity, but rather let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart. Now, when it comes to Enochian stuff, we know just because of what's actually in the Enoch passage that Enoch condemns, we know that the list that you get in Enoch is really angling for something that transcends the lists that he actually gives us. For instance, in Enoch, the real issue with the jewelry and the cosmetics, Enoch does mention cosmetics, even though the passage in Peter doesn't include that. What's really his concern is, seduction. It's immorality. You say, well, how do you know that, Mike? Well, look at what else is in the passage. Back to 1 Enoch 8:1. We read this in an earlier episode. "Asael taught men to make swords of iron and weapons and shields and breastplates and every instrument of war." Let's just stop right there. In case you hadn't noticed, the Israelites use weapons in their battles. In the conquest under Joshua, they're using swords and shields, okay? They wouldn't be doing that with God's blessing if the whole idea of how the Watchers corrupted humanity was only taken in this sort of rigidly literal way. I mean, if it was, hey, this is what the Watchers taught people, so we are never making a sword, we are never making a shield, we are never making a breastplate, because if we do that, then we're going along with what the Watchers, wanted in human self-destruction. Okay, the larger point is violence. It's warfare. It's shedding of blood unjustly and wantonly. It's killing. It's murder. Because these are the instruments of violence and bloodshed. They're perfectly, welcome to create these things and use them in a just manner, in a way that God would want them used, self-defense, or in this case, the biblical case, taking the land, and the whole thing about targeting the Anakim and all that. Okay, there's a good use and there's an illegitimate bad use. But to just look at the items like a grocery list, then if you're doing that, the only way to obey them is to eliminate them entirely. No, they have context. There's something that's being aimed at here. So when First Enoch 8 continues, Asael showed them metals of the earth and how they should work gold to fashion it suitably, and concerning silver to fashion it for bracelets and ornaments for women. And he showed them concerning antimony and eye paint and all manner of precious stones and dyes. Again, what he's really going after here, and this is the way that the Second Temple Jewish community interpreted it, really across the board, is that these things lend themselves to potentially, and in the lives of many people, being seduced, by the woman who uses these things. This is why certain women, of bad character, would do this again to seduce a man. It doesn't mean that you can't find ever a legitimate use for this. But here's where Peter comes in. Well, even if you can, this should not be your identity. Your identity should be in these other things that God values, the things that God really cares about. To be honest with you, the only way to really kind of understand the mentality here, the approach to this whole watcher, teaching idea, is to be familiar with the fact that for all of these things, there was a good alternative. There was a good legitimate knowledge of these things as well. And to understand that, all of that is traced to Second Temple traditions about Enoch. Enoch is viewed and cast in the wider Enochian literature as the rightful dispenser of divine knowledge over against what the Watchers taught people in the same spheres of knowledge. The easiest example is probably the knowledge of the heavens, okay? For Second Temple Jews, Enoch was the astrologer/astronomer. They didn't really make a distinction between those two terms like we do in the modern era. Broadly speaking, it's the idea that God, or illegitimate gods, can communicate through the heavens. That you would. It's a form of divination, all right, where you look at the heavens and then you interpret them. Okay, that's astrology. Well, there was a legitimate thing about that Jews viewed as Enochian. Enoch was the one who went to heaven, was taken to heaven by God. He didn't see death. And if you read the Enochian literature, Enoch is like the astrologer, astronomer par excellence. This is where the Qumran Essenes, again, this is why they derive their calendar from Enochian material, because their study of the heavens revealed the mind of God in its perfect order and precision, and they assigned all glory to the single God of the Bible, the God of Enoch. Whereas what the Watcher traditions are doing is, no, all of these celestial objects are in fact, divine beings, and you need to follow them, not their creator. You need to, it's idolatry. There are two sides to the astronomy, astral theology coin. One is evil and idolatrous. The other one is not. And it's the same thing with all these other technologies. There are two sides to them. If I could go down the astronomy path a lot, because I'm still working on this astronomy astral prophecy book. But Abraham in Second Temple tradition was viewed as a master astrologer, astronomer. Why? Because the teaching was that he inherited his knowledge from Enoch. He knows who created the heavens, and he knows what they're trying to communicate. The Essenes and other Jewish sects would have viewed Abraham as someone able to parse what was happening in the heavens correctly. You get this as in heaven, so on earth, and how the stars are worshiping God up there. That's how we need to worship down here, and God's sort of giving us hints about what he's up to, and how God is propelling time and human history. All of this derives from astronomy. And in the Jewish Second Temple tradition, Abraham was a master of this. Now, the Bible never says that. But this is the idea. Again, there was a good source of heavenly knowledge, of forbidden knowledge, of special knowledge. There's a good source, and that's Enoch. And there's a wicked source. Those are the Watchers. So if you don't have any frame of reference for both sides of the coin, then when you go back and you read something like First Enoch 8, it's like, well, we should just be throwing all this stuff out. Well, there's a reason why Israelites and Jews didn't, because they did have both sides of the coin in their head. There's a reason to have weapons. Okay? It's okay if our women, braid their hair and wear jewelry, but wanton violence and sexual seduction are bad. That's the bad side of those, the coin, for those things. So each one of these things, medicinal herbs, what Israelites, forbade the use of using plants for healing? No, there are passages in the Old Testament where they certainly do that. But if they're producing altered states, if they're the pharmacopoeia kind of variety, which Paul talks about, that's bad. Okay, it's good and it's bad. They're two sides of the same coin, and we often lose this because we don't get deep enough into the content. Again, Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory. Just read the first 4 verses of Psalm 19. There's like 10 verbs of communication there. This is why Paul quotes Psalm 19:4 in Romans 10:18 in response to, this whole notion that everyone should have known that Jesus had come, that there was the birth of the divine king, and his proof text for that is Psalm 19:4. They have their heads in this material, but there are two sides of the coin. And so we need to be careful to kind of, again, become familiar with that. This is why I say, usually in my talk about should Enoch be in the canon? No, who cares what kind of status it has? You should read material that biblical writers read, because if you read that material and you understand it, you get a certain feel for it, then you're going to be able to be a better reader, a more intelligent reader of your Bible. And it's kind of that simple, but yet, that requires work. So it's not an easy task. It's a simple task, but not an easy one. So consequently, I would say it's not coherent to say that 1 Enoch 8 or 1 Peter forbids all jewelry or cosmetics or colored clothing or dyes, the use of dyeing. We should all wear white. No, it doesn't forbid these things. Again, we'd all be in violation. As would the builders of the tabernacle. They dyed their fabrics. Didn't they know about the watchers? They sinned. They're following the watcher. No, that's ridiculous. Okay? Just like the Israelite army isn't following the watchers when they're creating swords and shields. Okay? We would all be in violation, as would most of everybody else in the Old Testament that God, blesses and honors and says nice things about. It's not an all or nothing proposition. There are two sides to this, two sides of the coin. So I think that we need to keep in mind when we're looking at passages like 1 Peter 3 and a few other ones too.